You ever get that feeling driving late at night, maybe you're on a road trip, passing one of those 18-wheelers, and for a split second you think, who's behind the wheel? What's their story?
Yeah, I know that feeling.
Well, today we're diving deep into a side of trucking most people don't even realize exists, the unsettling link between long-haul trucking and, believe it or not, serial killers.
Right.
We've got a really chilling investigative piece called They're a Mystery Inside the Deadly World of Serial Killer Truckers.
Mm,
It's by David Smith. And to really paint the picture, we'll be looking at the case of Robert Ben Rhoades,
okay.
using sources from Wikipedia, Murderpedia, even a Spanish language article. We'll get into all the details.
Some intrigue.
This article, it doesn't mess around. Right off the bat, it hits you with a statistic that honestly made me stop and think. Long-haul trucking is the #1 profession for serial killers. I mean, wow.
Yeah.
What's your initial reaction to that?
It's definitely attention grabbing. I think it's so unsettling because it's not something you would expect. Trucking, we think deliveries, logistics, keeping things moving, not exactly the first thing that comes to mind with serial murder.
Exactly.
But think about it, the FBI, they've got a whole division, the Highway Serial Killings Initiative, dedicated to this. They're dealing with over 850 murders, and get this, over 200 cases, they're still unsolved.
That's a staggering number of unsolved cases, and it makes you wonder, why trucking? What is it about this job that makes these crimes possible? What is it about this line of work that might draw in someone already prone to violence?
Well, the article really gets into the unique challenges that come with long-haul trucking. Imagine it. Isolation. You're spending days, sometimes weeks, on the road, barely any human contact. Then you pile on the pressure of those long hours, often leading to, well, let's be honest, an unhealthy lifestyle. Not enough sleep, bad food, it all takes a toll.
And that's before you even factor in the sheer responsibility they carry every single day. I mean, they're hauling tons of cargo, literally keeping our supply chains running. Lives depend on them. That's got to weigh on you, no pun intended.
Absolutely. And that kind of pressure cooker environment, it can really become a breeding ground for serious mental health issues.
Yeah.
The article talks about higher rates of depression, anxiety, even substance abuse among truck drivers. And when you combine that with, say, pre-existing issues or maybe even undiagnosed personality disorders, well, it's not a good mix. There's this expert, Frank Figliuzzi, a former assistant director of the FBI. He wrote a book called Long Haul, Hunting the Highway Serial Killers. And he argues that the trucking profession might actually attract people with certain tendencies, maybe even sociopathic tendencies.
Now, it's important to remember we're talking about a small but incredibly dangerous group here. Most truckers are just hardworking people trying to make a living.
Absolutely.
But to illustrate just how dangerous this small group can be, let's look at a case, a very chilling example. Robert Ben Rhoades.
Okay.
This case really drives home the human cost of this phenomenon. When you look at Rhoades' past, we're pulling from his Wikipedia and Murderpedia entries, you see red flags early on. A troubled childhood, brushes with the law, even a dishonorable discharge from the Marines. What struck me was how those early signs seemed to escalate once he was out on the open road. It's like the isolation, the anonymity. It gave him both the opportunity and the cover to act on his darkest impulses.
Right. It's like the trucking lifestyle enabled him.
He did. He mostly preyed on hitchhikers and women at truck stops, vulnerable people he could easily overpower. His MO, his modus operandi, was terrifyingly calculated. But here's where it gets truly horrifying, and this detail, it stuck with me. Rhoades turned his truck cab into a mobile torture chamber.
Oh, wow.
It's almost impossible to imagine. He'd hold his victims captive, sometimes for days, even weeks, subjecting them to unimaginable violence and depravity.
That's just awful.
And as if that wasn't bad enough, he meticulously documented his crimes. He took pictures of his victims, including a 14-year-old girl named Regina K. Walters. And as horrific as it is to say, those photos were key in catching him and eventually getting a conviction.
It's hard to believe someone could do something like that.
Her case, and so many others like it, really make you think about the victims, the people whose lives are shattered or tragically cut short by these predators. It's heartbreaking to think about these victims. The article, What We Know About Rhoades' Victims, it paints a really bleak picture. A lot of them, though not all, were women on the fringes of society, often involved in sex work, which made them easy targets.
Right.
And while their backgrounds, their stories, they were all different, tragically, there were these common threads. You see histories of trauma, a lot of times starting in childhood. unstable family situations, and this pattern of ending up in abusive relationships. It's like this cycle of vulnerability that predators like Rhodes, they zero in on.
Yeah, it's a sad reality.
It really highlights how anyone can become a victim.
Mhm.
The article even mentioned a preacher's daughter who fell prey to one of these guys. It shatters that whole stereotype that this only happens to a certain kind of person.
It's a good point. And what's scarier is how the digital world is just opening up new ways for this exploitation to happen. Online grooming, recruitment into trafficking rings, these are very real dangers.
Absolutely. And that brings up a huge question. What can we do to fight this? What can we do to make the roads safer, to protect the most vulnerable?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Hmm.
There's no easy answer, no magic solution. But the article does bring up some interesting strategies. One thing it focuses on is the vetting process for truck drivers. Right now, it's shockingly easy for someone with a criminal past to slip through the cracks and get behind the wheel of one of these rigs.
That's a scary thought. You'd think there'd be serious background checks, really digging into their work history, especially for a job with like, that much freedom, that much access to, well, basically everywhere.
You would think so, wouldn't you? It
Yeah.
seems obvious. I mean, we trust these drivers with so much, with valuable cargo, with keeping our supply chains moving, with our lives, literally, when we're on the road with them. Shouldn't there be a much higher standard to make sure they're trustworthy when it comes to, well, basic human safety?
Absolutely. And it's not just about weeding out the bad apples from the start. It's also about recognizing how things are done in the industry, how that might actually be contributing to the problem. Remember, we were talking about the mental health crisis among truckers.
Right? The isolation, the pressure, all of it.
The article suggests that maybe trucking companies, they have a responsibility to provide better support, offering more downtime, giving them access to mental health resources, even just trying to build a more positive, more supportive
It's
workplace.
about changing the whole culture.
So, holding the industry accountable, both for who they hire and how they treat their drivers, that's key. But what about the role of technology in all this? I mean, couldn't advancements in tracking, in surveillance, couldn't that help prevent these crimes from happening?
That's a really interesting angle. The article suggests that mandatory tracking devices in all trucks, that could be a game changer. Think about it. A system where law enforcement can track these trucks in real time, maybe even flag suspicious activity and intervene before something happens.
It sounds almost futuristic, using technology to predict and stop these horrible acts before they occur.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And we're not that far off. The technology's there, or it's getting there fast. And it's not just about tracking trucks either. That Spanish language article, it talked about how they're developing algorithms that can actually identify potential victims in online ads. It's like fighting fire with fire, using technology to fight back against the very platforms being used to exploit people.
That's incredible, and honestly, a huge relief to hear. But technology can only do so much, right? What about the human side of things? Law enforcement, social services, what can they do to address this?
You're right. Technology, it's a tool, but it's not the whole solution. The article really emphasizes the need for a totally different approach from law enforcement, especially when it comes to how they deal with victims.
So you're talking about a shift away from treating victims like they're the criminals, and instead actually trying to get them the help they need.
Exactly. For too long, there's been this focus on punishment, especially when it comes to sex workers. Instead of seeing them as victims of a system that's failed them, they get arrested, they get charged, and it just pushes them further to the margins. The article argues for a more compassionate approach, and honestly, a more effective one. Connect these individuals with social services, give them the support and resources to get out of these situations.
It's about breaking the cycle, offering a helping hand instead of slapping on handcuffs.
Exactly. But it goes beyond just law enforcement. It's about us as a society facing the root causes of this problem.
You're hitting the nail on the head. We need to have honest conversations about the demand that fuels this industry, about the societal factors that make people vulnerable, about the lack of support for those trying to escape. It's complicated. It's a lot to unpack.
It is. But that's what this deep dive is for, right? Articles like this one, they remind us that awareness is the first step.
By shedding light on these dark corners, we can empower ourselves to make a difference. It really makes you think, we've gone from these bone-chilling statistics to ways we might tackle this, even touched on what might be going on in the minds of these killers. But for someone listening right now, what's the takeaway? What does it all mean?
That's the big question. These crimes, they often happen in the shadows, hidden by the sheer size of our highways. And while this deep dive isn't about scaring anyone, It is about opening our eyes. It's about realizing that there are real dangers out there in places we often connect with, freedom, adventure even.
It's about being aware, being present, maybe even a little cautious when you're out there on the road.
Exactly. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Don't be afraid to report anything suspicious. You never know. You might save someone's life.
Like Regina K. Walters. As hard as it is to think about those pictures, they were vital in catching her killer.
Right.
It shows that we all have a part to play in stopping this, whether it's demanding better safety from those trucking companies, supporting groups fighting human trafficking, or even just learning about this and talking about it. Every little bit helps.
I agree. Awareness, action, and working together to make our roads safer for everyone.
We've spent this deep dive in the dark side of trucking, this unsettling link to serial killers, and the terrible impact it has on people's lives. But even with all that darkness, there's hope. By shining a light on this, by understanding what causes it, by working to find solutions, we can make things safer for everyone. Remember, those vast highways connecting us, they can represent freedom and opportunity, but it's up to us to make sure they don't become hunting grounds. Stay safe out there, stay informed, and keep those wheels turning.